So it's a great point, Mike, that the way that it's constructed today, or at least the demands that we're making on AI today are so broad that we can't get consistent results that are useful. But we've talked about potentially ways to make that happen. I think the promise of agentic AI is not that it tries to do everything, right? I think typically we're asking an AI to do one AI to do five things, and those five things are inherently complex and require different sets of skills or different sets of knowledge. And so it's challenging. And I think that's why sometimes these things hallucinate or they deliver the wrong results. I've found better results in trying, instead of one AI doing five things, I want five AIs each doing one thing. And we've talked about the promise of composability. Let's talk about
Yeah.
composability and services in terms of how that drives scale. How do you think
It's,
about that?
it's one of my favorite words, right? Because, composability, I say it all the time. We've got to become composable. And coming from the development side of the world, you'll hear people talk about microservices. And so when we had to break up the monolith, I, I myself have built the big monolithic app that did everything. And then you're like, oh my gosh, I can't. For those that don't know, I ran my own development shop for about 25 years where we built custom web solutions for people. And I think I was successful because I learned early on about composability. I'm not going to build this big app for you and then this big app for you. But I need an authentication piece and I need a logging piece. So I started building these building blocks that I can then stitch together quickly to then deliver at scale. And that what I early on learned how to do that. And it's funny, I give the example to people sometimes. When we talk about architecture, right? So how do I take vision and strategy, get it to execution? I need architecture to do that. And people almost always use like an architect that architects a building. And I was at a conference and Wendy Keene, the business, I call her the mother of business architecture, right? She used your example from our last episode about the importance of design. Would you get into an airplane if you didn't think it was designed properly, right? So we need to be able to have that ability to say, was something designed properly? So the example I like to use people, not so much architecture of a building, but think about a restaurant. Think about how a restaurant can run at scale. You don't come into a restaurant, sit down and say, here's what I want. They hand you a menu and say, what do you want off this menu? Because they're designed in the back to take all the product, all the vegetables and the meats and the breads and everything. And they've got a design where they can quickly build and compose what it is you want. And who are some of the best composers out there? Ray Kroc at McDonald's, the guys that did Five Guys. They said, this is the scope of what we're going to deliver. This is how we can compose at scale. So I like to use that. I think that works for people. Something like, oh yeah, because you tell that story of how, think about it this way. Don't think so much tech. Think about how we can build these pieces. So when you're building something, refactor it down to have this piece of it. And I think, because you've showed me this before, and I think you're spot on. Using these agentic AIs to be focused. This agent does this agent does this, and then you can orchestrate those to deliver whatever solutions you want. Now you can. That's my take. Does that make sense? Resonate, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the notion of building blocks is a smart one, right? The way I would put it to people who are not technical is that imagine Lego bricks, right?
Yeah.
Like if you wanted to build something and it just came to you as one big piece, you would have that one thing and then you would never be able to do anything with it. Right. And we know, as we just talked about starting the episode, things change, right? We live in a world where the business changes, the market changes, the technology changes, that we can predict. So the notion that I can now break apart this thing into little tiny pieces and then reassemble it into something new and different is actually what gives you the flexibility and the adaptability for that change, right? So if I build something and it works and it's very, very small, I can take that one thing and now put it in a completely different configuration, right? So what we're trying to do, I think, is figure out what are those pieces, and whether it's AI or whether it's applications or anything else for that matter, how do we assemble it? I like
Right.
the restaurant example because it's one that I use a lot. In fact, I just used it in my last job. Was we were doing a major transformation and we're trying to get 24 production units to all standardize on a singular enterprise process, because as you point out, always is cheap and sometimes is expensive. because once we get to that single enterprise process, then I can automate it and reap the benefits of that automation. A lot of pushback from the business because they were looking, one was a daily news program and the other is a seasonal documentary series, right? So very different in terms of how they deliver their product, the pace of change that they're dealing with. But when you look at it from a process perspective, it's actually the same process. And so the example I used is actually Chipotle. I think Chipotle is hands down the most brilliant at coming up with how do you achieve enormous customization at scale. The reason I say that is because if you walk into, and I just did this calculation, if you walked into any Chipotle today, take a wild guess how many distinct entree choices you could have.
Got to be in the millions because of the different, right? The parameters that are out there, right? Yeah, it's got to be,
Yeah,
a
so
lot.
you know the answer to this. Most people, when I ask that question, will tell me around 100. Right.
Yeah, right.
If they walk in, they think it's about 100, but the actual number is over 12 million. Chipotle has been able to figure out the formula for how do you achieve enormous customization? How do you give a bespoke entree item to your customer while still standardizing how they do it? And they do have a standard. Like when you go in, the first thing you got to tell them is, what are you ordering? Are you ordering a burrito? Are you ordering a burrito bowl? Are you ordering, whatever those choices are? Then you go to the next stage. What's your rice? Right? A couple of choices there. Next stage. What's your protein? Few choices there. It's that standard model of approach from a process perspective, and then the options and the configurations. And I think this is actually the best way for any complex organization to deliver a process at scale in terms of trying to handle the variation between their businesses.
Yeah, it's funny because years ago I worked for all the big integration companies that was bought by an even bigger company and figure out what animal and it was integration company. But anyway, I had a slide deck that walked me through that. I had, tomatoes and pickles and lettuce, and here's how we do it. Now imagine if this was, authentication and business process and this business. So, rigor drives process brings value. So that's what we've got to be able to. I do one thing I want that always pops in my head, as old as new again. I'm a SOA certified architect, right? A service-oriented architect. People go, oh, that's from 10, that's way old. We tried it, it didn't work. No, it's a set of principles. So I ask people, go back and look at the 8 principles that make up. So they're all based on, the last one is composability. They're still relevant today. They're great principles. I say to people, there's nothing new here. We're just trying to run at better scale today. What we've been doing 30 years ago, we're trying to do. So I get excited about technology. Oh my God, how hard this is. I become the old man, right? I had to walk to school in the snow uphill and home up. I become that guy. We have to do. I get it, but I'm excited about it. I think it's really impressive if we embrace the scalable approach for composability. If we try to build these big monolithic AI things to do everything, you're going to fail. And just like you would if you did it in a traditional development method.
Yeah. Similarly, I got my start as an architect in the integration space. So I was a TIBCO trained architect. If you remember TIBCO, right? So TIBCO was promoting the concept of the integration bus, right? So most enterprises were dealing with just a mess of point-to-point connections between their applications. And obviously, whenever you did upgrades, that had huge ripple effects because you had to fix all of the integrations. But the concept behind TIBCO was integrate to a singular point, to abstraction, or to use a really technical term, a canonical model. And then you only had to worry about that one connection point because you wouldn't break anything else. I think, to your point, that pattern still works from a scalability perspective.
100%.
And
so that would be a great topic, I think, for us to take, because I could talk for hours on the layered approach to how we build integration at scale. And to me, it's how do I take my data, put it under management, put it in a composable state so I can be agile. It's not rocket science. And if businesses can lean into it, that I think they'd be shocked at how fast. And then what I'd like is this AI is really putting a lens on that. because to get that AI value, your data better be under management. And if your data is under management, it better be accessible in a scalable, the TIPCO, the ESB, the MuleSoft, the layered technology approach, how you get your data from system process to experience layers to consume. And then what we're maturing into even more, to get a little geeky here, is the EDA, right? Event-driven architecture. So instead of moving blocks of data, I just go event orientated, and then AI will just explode with that capability. If we can get to an event-driven architecture and then let AI, these little micro-focused agents play off those events, now we'll have scale. Now we'll have truth. Yeah, it's exciting time. We can tip either way. I think we'll tip in the right direction personally, but we could tip either way. So